Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks, bringing you the latest news from Taiwan. I'm Annie Kuo.
I'm Huang. The U.S. and China just completed large military drills close to Taiwan. We'll discuss what exactly does this mean for the region and Taiwan.
Joining us here today are Alexander Huang, International Affairs Director and representative to the U.S. of the Kuomintang, or KMT, Taiwan's largest opposition party. Next, Tony Hu, former U.S. Department of Defense Senior Director for Taiwan, China, Mongolia. Tony was also formerly the Deputy Chief of the Security Cooperation Office at AIT, the U.S. de facto embassy in Taiwan. Alex and Tony, welcome back to the show.
It's our pleasure.
China again held massive military drills around Taiwan right after President Tsai's U.S. visit. Tony, what message is China trying to send with this?
Well, China wants to keep the pressure on Taiwan. It's a way of intimidating the people so that they can achieve their objective, which is hoping for Taiwan to surrender without a fight by imposing the type of fear into people's heart, and I believe that's the main purpose.
So it's some psychological warfare.
It is a psychological warfare, yes.
Alex, you mentioned earlier that trips with the president transiting in the U.S. and the Taiwan president meeting with U.S. officials, including the House Speaker, is long normal practice. Why now? Why is China acting in this way?
Well, of course, it's against the background of a very large U.S.-China strategic competition nowadays. And also, the United States wanted to show it as a normal practice because previous presidents had also done transit in the United States, making phone calls with the U.S. government officials and have meetings and dinner, lunch with the state governors and officials. This time is a little bit different because President Tsai had met Speaker McCarthy in public, and China felt unhappy and they wanted to react.
Although we've seen, say, visits from Newt Gingrich to the president of Taiwan, and also Nancy Pelosi was here last year. So it's not the first time.
It's not the first time, but China, not only with intention, now they have capability to show their anger, if you will. And so they are not shy away from doing that.
So you're saying they weren't happy back then as well, but they didn't have the capability to do what they're doing now?
At Newt Gingrich period, that's 20-some years ago, the China's capability in expressing their anger was different from today. And of course, we saw their strong reaction to Speaker Pelosi's visit last year, and this time, even though with a scaled down meeting, but still China used that occasion to practice their military plan against Taiwan.
Is the PLA also intentionally trying to raise tensions into Taiwan's median line? And speaking of which, what was previously perceived as the red line? Could you also elaborate to us a little bit?
The median line was a understanding of military operations on both sides for decades. But now they use the occasion of the time immediately after Speaker Pelosi's visit to lift or to challenge the median line. And after that, they started the so-called combat readiness patrol as a new normal. So nowadays, people believe that the median line is already out of function. And that put Taiwan in the much more difficult situation under military pressure.
So this combat readiness control, that new norm that you just mentioned, also Tony, I would also like to ask for your perception on this. Do you think this is also an intent to really dictate how the Taiwanese government should interact with the U.S. officials?
Certainly, it's trying to exert influence and saying, hey, if you do more with China, I'm going to make life harder for you. However, I think China never learned that it always backfires. And even under the KMT regime, I think a strong arm approach usually causes a reverse reaction within Taiwan's population. And I think this is exactly what they're trying to do again. with the new normal, try to see how far Taiwan is going to back down to establish this new normal, how far they can push Taiwan.
But do you think this new normal is really going to work, not only to Taiwan but also to the U.S.?
I don't believe so. They will gain some advantage, some more room to maneuver, and some more threat against Taiwan. However, there are tactics. We talked about this as a gray zone tactics, right? But there are tactics that's been developed to counter these type of gray zone activities, because Taiwan, one of the things about these gray zone activities is China trying to make Taiwan use up their limited resources, such as, because the airplanes, if you fly up there every time to challenge them, those fourth generation jets like F-16, IDF, and Mirage, they use up the hours and they need to be maintained and repaired, and the spare parts get used up. So China has a lot more resources to sustain this, but Taiwan doesn't. So Taiwan needs to come up with a way so that when their ship comes, you don't send out your big ship, you send out your small patrol boats, but with anti-ship missiles, that's still a threat to them, but watch them with a much cheaper way of watching them still achieve your objective. Airplane, you might send up the old F-5 that's almost retired. It's cheap to fly. Taiwan makes its own parts because those aircraft were manufactured here, and go up there and watch them rather than sending your newest jets, using up your combat hours, or using up your training hours. The pilots need to be trained. When they're out there circling the sky, watching this Chinese airplane fly by, they're not being trained. So these are type of things I think Taiwan should consider.
Right.
Don't play the game that China is playing.
Right.
You play your own game. It's critically important that Taiwan MND recognize that whenever you let the enemy take the initiative and you become subject to following their initiative, you're in trouble.
Right.
So Taiwan needs to take a look at that.
And especially 2024 presidential election in Taiwan is coming up very soon. And of course, the whole world is also watching how this is going to turn out. But this could, at the same time, could it also be worse for this new norm that China is imposing around the waters in Taiwan?
Well, it's hard to tell. I mean, as Tony has said, that in previous experience, China always done something and got backfired. And this time, of course, there are uncertainties and unknown factors. And because after Speaker Pelosi's visit, there is a growing awareness that Taiwan might be dragged into a military conflict with China. And whether Taiwan is prepared, and how much time we need to redefine our operational concept, as Tony suggested, how much munitions that we can, keep in our stockpile, and all these issues that need to be reviewed. So we are working tirelessly, I think, try to find a good solution as soon as possible.
What lessons do you feel Taiwan has learned from these drills, as we've seen with Nancy Pelosi and the second one just a few weeks ago?
I think is that Taiwan learned that the threat is constant now, and they are getting closer to Taiwan's contiguous zone, and the perimeter is shrinking, and our reaction time is shortened.
But is Taiwan adjusting to that? Have you seen changes in the MND?
Well, I think they have done, the MND has done their job, but still, as we see that the new phenomenon, the new conditions requires time to figure out what would be the best way to use our resources, because the airplane will wear out, the frames of platforms will be punished if we overuse it. And these are the issues that we need not only to look at how we adjust our ways of respond, but also we need to communicate with our partners, especially the United States, to see how together we can address the issue.
And that's China's objective, to wear out Taiwan's defense and its capabilities.
But it also pushed Taiwan to talk more to the United States, right?
Which is a good thing. Tony, I wanted to go to this new development that we've seen. We've seen the PLA release a video that includes PLA troops storming Taiwan's Central Mountain Range.
Right.
What do you think is behind that? Is it trying to scare Taiwanese?
Exactly. We talked about psychological warfare. That's
Right.
exactly what it is. The fact is, it's not that easy for them to attack Taiwan. First of all, crossing the straits is not easy. And
Was there only 2 months that they can cross? Was it?
yeah, the current of the Taiwan Strait is not conducive to an amphibious attack. So they know it, and personally, I don't think they'll do amphibious attack. I think they'll fake one to make sure the Taiwan forces are spread out through the island. But I think they will try to use civilian fleet, such as the Ro-Ro ship, to take over, try to grab a port using helicopter and airborne troops to grab a port and allow those big ships to come in to offload at a port the kind of firepower they need to achieve rapid victory. Because remember, just like Putin tried with Kyiv, where he tried to grab the capital and get a political surrender
Yes.
rather than a military surrender, I believe China will do the same. They're going to try to grab Taipei, get a political surrender versus a military surrender. So this is something I am certain Taiwan has prepared for, because this is something that even when I was still in the military, the kind of wargaming that we have done, what are the most dangerous scenario and the most likely scenario that China might use to try to attack Taiwan. And one of the most dangerous scenario is for them to grab one of the ports and try to take over Taiwan and get a political surrender.
Do you think this propaganda, that the video that we saw, is it specifically, do you think the audiences are for the audiences in China or audiences in Taiwan? As we talked about earlier, 2024 election is coming up. It could be a way to intimidate Taiwanese voters as well, right?
I think it has a objective of domestic China and PLA themselves, because they must convince the PLA themselves that, hey, we can do this, and nobody can stop us. Americans gonna approach, and we're gonna use the missiles and knock them out and all that. If you look at the technology and look at it realistically, the type of missile defense, the type of maneuvering of the forces, of the coalition forces, they will be here and they will be able to defend Taiwan. But so the audience, I think a lot of it is for domestic consumption in China.
Right.
Okay. Certainly, the psychological warfare aspect is also important to make sure Taiwan's scared and ready to surrender without a fight.
Alex, as a boost to morale for the PLA, you've been very familiar in terms of, you've studied the PLA for years. What do you feel the PLA will be doing with this? Do you feel that it's still divided, or will this put the PLA together to work on Taiwan?
Well, I think the party controls the gun. I have no doubt about it. So I would not look into any different, debate or different views on how to do. I think the Central Military Commission will, give very strict and direct orders and conduct that kind of warfare. The issue is that, as Tony has just suggested, and how fast can you achieve your goal? Because for Beijing, once you started this military invasion, then you cannot stop. Because the longer the conflict or the lack of achievement that can be reported back home, then you will not only create domestic outcry, but also international sanctions. So our job is to make sure that China cannot achieve a fast result. And
But how united is the PLA? Is it very united in terms of, you say Beijing, say Xi Jinping orders today, we're going to invade Taiwan. Will they go in at full force?
Well, I think so.
I think so.
I have no doubt about, don't bet on that.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Let's now hear from Arthur Ding, longtime military expert and Professor Emeritus at National Chengchi University. He spoke to Rath earlier about how America is responding to Chinese military aggression.
Professor, the U.S. Philippine military drills are said to be one of the largest since the Cold War. Some say that the U.S. is trying to strengthen the first island chain. How does this compare with increased military activity by China?
U.S. and China now is in the in the very strong competition each other. And since President Biden came to office, President Biden leads several jobs he would to do. The first one to build alliance again. So we can see at the beginning so-called Quad, then AUKUS, and later on we see he tried to uh, mediate the relationship between Japan and South Korea. Now to strengthen the relation with Philippines. So I guess this is part of the effort made by Biden administration to to build a kind of a alliance system, or try to revitalize the alliance system in order to compete with China. So we all know that there are other things President Biden has said. He has to do. The first one is to revitalize the U.S. economies. And bring the so-called industry back, and propose so-called industrial policy, which I would say is quite new because during the so-called since the Soviet Union collapsed in the United States, there's no so-called industrial policy anymore. It's it's all up to the so-called free economy, up to the private sector uh, to operate themselves. So this is the since the end of the Cold War. This is the Biden administration bring back so-called the industrial policy again. So industrial policy alliance, and also the revitalized so-called democratic institution. Those are the efforts made by President Biden.
But do you feel this is a response to China as we see Xi Jinping being more aggressive? Or do you feel it's a standalone initiative by the Biden administration?
I would say several ASEAN countries, including Philippines particularly, and Vietnam, uh, so-called Socialist Republic of Vietnam, those countries have so-called maritime dispute with China. And we see in the past decades, in Xi Jinping's first two terms, China has been very extremely aggressive to pushing out, their own so-called maritime policy. So this created a rising concern, I would say, in several South ASEAN countries. Philippines and Vietnam probably are particularly concerned about China's aggressive maritime policy. So, they gradually, incrementally to build the uh, cooperation on security aspect with United States. So I would say it's China's behavior create opportunity for United States to rebuild the relationship with Philippines and probably the Vietnamese government.
The US sent a warship through the Taiwan Strait. What message is the US trying to send here?
This is not first time uh, the U.S. Warship has been frequently to pass the Taiwan Strait. I would say the message is clear and sound. Is that is the U.S. Want to keep so-called peace and stability in the Taiwan Straits, and so those are, I would say, the very strong, clear-cut message sent to China and also sent to alliance members.
Professor, apart from the US Philippine military drills, we see Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, visiting Vietnam. What is this for?
I would say it's not to the level of confrontation yet. Before a real conflict erupt, each side, for instance, in the U.S. side, U.S. try to strengthen and enhance the alliance relationship with allied members. On the other hand, we see China try to divide and rule U.S. alliance members. So I would say uh, it's try to strengthen each other's position, but this position probably not will not necessarily to be escalate into a kind of a confrontation or conflict.
Apart from confrontation, do you see any signs of de escalation between the US and China, not just in terms of military, but in terms of diplomacy and overall with regional alliances?
President Biden, on the one hand, make every effort to revitalize the so-called old alliance system in the Indo-Pacific region. But on the other hand, once again, Biden administration with Israel is so-called guardrail, try to build a guardrail with China in order to manage any kind of a difference and a potential conflict with China. So I would say it's not just build the alliance for the conflict, also try to manage the potential conflict.
Arthur mentioned that the U.S. is leveraging discontent from China's neighbors from its aggression in the South China Sea to strengthen alliances in the region. Alex, what can we read from the joint U.S.-Philippine drills?
I think, first of all, we need to understand that not only based on the previous efforts of Quad, that's United States, Japan, India, and Australia, and AUKUS, that's United States, UK, and Australia. Right now, there are more countries that sign up or involved in the entire U.S. Indo-Pacific security strategy. I think the Philippines is the newest one on board.
But it's also the largest since the Cold War. Why is that?
I think because it's based on its geographical vicinity.
To Taiwan.
Not only to Taiwan, but to the South China Sea. And the Philippines is strategically located in that area. That and the most critical channel is between Taiwan and the Philippines, the Basi Channel. It's very critical for China's submarines or any underwater assets to go into the deep blue. And so that's the critical area that the United States would have to look into. Of course, this kind of decision and cooperation would have to meet with the domestic Filipino, thinking and discussion. But I think the overall posture is more clear than before that the entire First Island chain is lined up to deal with the expansion of the Chinese forces.
Do you think this is also a direct response from the Chinese military drills?
Partly yes, because the Chinese drills surrounding Taiwan or encircling Taiwan is not targeting at Taiwan only. It's a response to the United States Indo-Pacific deployment.
Yeah.
And how do you think, how effective is this in deterring China?
Well, I think China has an objective, and Xi Jinping is a very ambitious man. So will it deter China? Maybe, maybe not, because in his mind, he feels he has a divine mission to be the person who will grab Taiwan. So I'm hoping that the PLA can be deterred, especially psychologically, because if you look at this exercise in the Philippines, 17,600 people, largest, like you said, ever. When I was in the Philippines, it was running around 5,000 people a year.
Threefold.
And that was huge. And this year, the exercise area, normally, it's just teaching Filipino how to defend their country. But this year, with the northern exercise area, its objective, obviously, is defending Taiwan. And also, the newly opened, the 4 new bases, 3 of them is up north in Luzon. They will be basically for war reserve supplies, so that when China tries to apply its anti-access area denial, too late. The United States is already inside your war zone, so the access is already there. And so I believe by looking at some of this stuff, and by looking at, as Alex just said, the type of coalition that the United States is building, RIMPAC last year, 26 countries. Okay, pitch black exercise earlier this year, 17 countries. This Palakatang exercise in the Philippines, observers from England, France, India, Korea, Japan, plus some Asian countries, observers. Of course, Aussie actually has 1,100 people, no, 110 people participating for the first time. It is likely this bilateral body baton exercise become multilateral in the future. So all with a single objective,
Right.
deter China. So yes, I'm hoping this will work, but Xi Jinping as the person, I'm not sure.
But do you think this is sustainable? As we're seeing bilateral to multilateral, we're trying to pull in as many countries to deter China. But as time goes on, these countries may also be threatened by China, militarily or economically. Do you think this is going to be sustainable for the U.S.?
I think so. You know, I was making a speech the other day, and similar question was asked. The fact is, it's cheaper for the United States to spend money now to preposition to deter than to spend money at a wartime and also reconstruction after the war. You're talking about maybe 100-fold difference. It's cheaper to build up the forces now to deter, to prevent war, than to allow the war to happen.
And actually go to war.
Or actually go to war, exactly.
Alex, I wanted to bring, in terms of China and its response, how concerned is it? It's sending its top diplomat to the Philippines.
You know, right now, not only a U.S.-China strategic competition, you know, in the Taiwan area, and I think it's also a competition in the Middle East.
But is that a response to these drills that?
I think so. I think China wanted to have a first-hand observation, and if not the all-out efforts to at least assess that how Manila look at the entire regional situation and whether China can convince Bongbong president to reconsider its cooperation. I know because China also understand that that Manila needs to go through a convincing efforts within its own countries about, you know, how close that the Filipinos can work with the United States. I think the Philippines president has determined that this is in their interest to get closer to the United States to protect the Filipinos' interests, especially in the South China Sea.
So Tony, has the Philippines under Bongbong chosen sides?
I'm certain of it. You know, China was the first place that Marcos visited after he became the president in January, and I think his objective was achieve a mutually agreeable for progress related to South China Sea. However, I think he walked away after being beat up by Xi and decided, I cannot count on a peaceful resolution with China. I cannot count on sharing the resources in South China Sea with China. China wants it all. I better get some friends. So I think that visit, as you can see, what happened after that visit, it shows that Marcos did not get a good reception in China. He was talked down to.
Even with the deals and all that, business deals.
But the business deals compares to
National
China with
security.
other countries. I think the Philippine president understand that even he was one of the earliest, you know, head of state visiting Xi Jinping once China reopened after COVID, but he did not get enough or even up to his expectations. So the incentives was not that high, but the military and other pressures become higher. So that's part of the reason that that President Marcos decided, you know, that going to the United States might be a way or a method to deal with the situation, at least for now.
So aside from Philippines stance, we're going to take a look into Japan, because Japan's defense ministry actually released a map, as we can see here, the Shandong, which is China's second aircraft carrier around Taiwan's East Coast. So first, what message is China trying to send? How worried is Japan right now?
Well, obviously, continue with the intimidation, psychological warfare theme. I think China this time, for the first time, actually encircled Taiwan. I think it's sending the message of their ability to blockade Taiwan. It's a nice show, but for a military person who conduct war planning and stuff, that is the most disadvantaged position for Shandong, because now Shandong sitting out there are subject to land-based anti-ship missile attack from Taiwan and aircraft attack and the coalition forces on the east side. So he's sandwiched in the middle. So I think once again this is just to show the layman, hey, I have a carrier, but Shandong in and by itself doesn't have a very strong combat capability, because if you look at, let's say his airplane of it, all right, J-15. J-15 is so heavy and it has the ramp to jump up. So if J-15 is filled with fuel, it can't carry weapons. If it carries weapons, it has to reduce the amount of fuel it carries, so it can't fly for very long. So comparatively, when U.S. carry their catapult off, the airplane take off fully fueled, fully armed, and conduct long-range missions with massive ordnance, massive firepower. So Shandong is not that powerful if you compare to U.S. forces. Shandong flew 120 missions in 3 days. Okay, Nimitz. If the captain of Nimitz is going to get a passing grade, he has to fly 120 missions in 12 hours. Warfighting exercise, 24 hours ongoing. When we do actual exercise, we do 24-hour ops, of course. He has to fly over 200 missions in a day in 24 hours to get a passing grade. So if you compare that, well, Shandong is really not that big of a threat.
So you think this is not a strategically new move or a smart move? It's just pretty much a show off to the domestic
it's a show
audience.
off because during wartime, I'm sure PLA is not that stupid. They're going to put Shandong and Liaoning north and south of Taiwan, so there's some land-based aircraft coverage to keep them safe. But right now, Shandong parking on the east side, it's for show.
I think for ship drivers, if we look at the map and look at the locations, I guess the skipper will really get nervous about what's underneath,
Yeah,
and the sorties, as Tony has just correctly stated, that for 3-day drill of the Chinese carrier aviation, the United States can cover the entire sorties by 1 day.
Oh yeah.
So that's number one. But I want to bring your notice to the map again, because if you look at the Shandong's maneuvering area or location, that was also a location that the United States carrier operations will look at. So that's if we keep that red dot in mind, and we will see that this area will be the future competing ground or sea area that the and I would see whether the United States carrier strike group will be there first, or the China can really pass the Bashi Channel and get to the Taiwan's East Coast.
But
so
speaking of aircraft carriers, how powerful is the Fujian, their newest carrier?
Well, we don't know yet.
We don't know.
We only know that the first one, Liaoning, is for training and development.
And was from Eastern Europe and
from Ukraine.
From Ukraine.
Yeah, and the second one is not as practiced as Liaoning, the first one. Now, the number 3, Fujian, is under construction, and we don't know yet. Maybe we should not be fooled by their, footage or propaganda shows. So we want to see that how it really operates.
It will have a catapult launch like the American carriers, so we should expect the ability to launch more aircraft, and aircraft can carry the fuel and the weapons they need to engage in combat. But I guess we'll have to wait and see if actually all the stuff.
Yeah, and also Fujian is larger.
It's much larger.
They can put more aircraft on board.
So it's definitely going to give us a lot more time to observe as well.
Right.
Now, let us turn to Lin Ying-yu, PLA expert and an assistant professor at Tamkang University. Our reporter Ken Ling spoke to him about China's motives and its latest military drills around Taiwan.
What are the tactical and strategic implications of the recent military exercise conducted by the People's Liberation Army from the eastern side of Taiwan?
I think the first thing, that is not the first time the PLA they using the Air Force flying near our the other side. But why in this time we need to very take care about that, because in this time that is a jet fighter that's take off from the aircraft carrier. So allows them from the mainland China take off and flying from the west side and until to the eastern side. But in this time, they direct using aircraft carrier. It will become a powerful attack force. So in this time, if they can come from the other side, that is mean they can direct attack our ROC Air Force airport in the other side. For example, we have in the Hualien, the Jiashan the air base. That is mean maybe the first strike is not also come from the western side. It's also come from other side. So in this time, it will be direct to showing to let the Taiwan's people need to rethink about our defense plan.
What could be the implications of China's People Liberation Army conducting military drills in 4 different maritime areas, including crossing a Taiwan Strait medium line after concluding drills around Taiwan? Does this suggest that China may have intentions to deliberately stir up tensions in the Taiwan Strait?
I think in this time the PLA they will be continue will be a lot of the operation. That is we can truly rethink in the before mainland China they saying that they want to set a new normal. What is the new normal? I mean the new normal in these times is will be meaning mainland China he want to using the military power continue and not stop. It's continue still they have the ship or the jet fighter flying near Taiwan the ADID or using the fleets using the destroy. It will be showing his power near the Taiwan.
What political signal is the United States conveying by having the USS Milius and Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer pass through the Taiwan Strait following the joint military exercise conducted by the People's Liberation Army?
American, he also want to send a message to direct communicate or direct to send a message to Beijing to let the Beijing to understand you can totally control that part because that's ocean that's area that sea was still controlled by US. It will be like a politic meaning, politic attitude. So that is in that operation, it will be showing the American he want to using military power, try to keep his power, keep his right in Pacific, especially near the Taiwan Strait.
According to a report by the Washington Post on leaked classified documents, Taiwan would be highly vulnerable in the event of an airstrike by the People's Liberation Army, and defending against Chinese military attack would be challenging. What strategies should Taiwan implement in defense against the PLA in the event of a cross-strait confrontation?
Defend the PLA attack from the air, that is very hard, especially as we know, it's not only the Air Force. PLA, they also will be have a lot of the rockets like a missile. It also will be direct to attack Taiwan. If we are under attack by the airport, we have to let our jet fighter that as soon as possible to change to another airport and or in the other place to prepare to fight. We need to keep our the field air defense because when we army will be meet the PLA army. That is mean maybe they will be try to already control the air and control command the sea.
If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel.
Feel free to leave any feedback in the comments section. We look forward to hearing your thoughts.
Tony, you talked about deterrence, and in the worst case scenario, when there isn't actually an attack, we've seen governments say from Indonesia, and last year we saw Japan. But why did Indonesia just announce contingency plans?
Actually, this is very interesting for me because I've been assigned in 2 U.S. embassies overseas. And also, while I was in AIT, I have crosstalk with Japan, Australia, different countries about non-combatant evacuation. These plans are made normally for both man-made and natural disasters. So most embassies should have these plans already in place, and it's not a big deal. Beijing, we implemented that plan during SARS, and Taiwan too. We recommended evacuation of American people.
So they're not specifically threatened by?
No, they should have this plan for both, like I said, natural or man-made disasters. Man-made disaster, war.
Right.
You gotta have that kind of plan in place because you never know when you need to implement that plan. So last month, U.S. Embassy Moscow said Americans get out because we got intelligence. Russians gonna grab Americans as human shield to bargain. It happened. Okay, these are usually this type of plans are in place with announcement for volunteer departure, then mandatory departure. Okay, and if you're American citizen, you gotta leave now, or we're not responsible for you.
Right.
The fact is, in the end, if we need to, we'll send in the soldiers and come get you and get you out, as it happened in Afghanistan. Okay, so these type of plans are always in place, at least for U.S. embassies around the world are in place, and for larger countries such as Australia, U.K., Japan, they will have it in their embassy. So the news about Indonesian having a plan now, it shouldn't come as a big surprise or worry about war being starting in the near future. Actually, remember just 2 months ago, American embassy announced, hey, Americans should have your bag ready just in case. That's after the earthquake in Turkey. They talk about natural disaster type departure, but some of Taiwan media used it as, Americans ready for war. You got to go. You know, no, it's not. It's normal.
So how exactly should citizens or civilians react to such plans? Like you said earlier, these plans were made just like for a precautious measure. It's not something to really worry about.
No.
But for civilians, they probably think something otherwise. How should they really react to it?
You know, I think MOFA, for one, Taiwan government should step out and say what I just said. This is normal. This is not out of it ordinary. This doesn't mean the war is imminent. That's how Taiwan citizens should react. They should accept it as a normal process for foreigners. Foreign governments are responsible for their citizens in Taiwan. So they need to be prepared. They need to have these plans.
You don't see the drums of war beating here, do you?
It depends on how we carefully crafted our foreign policy and mainland policy.
But as of
as of now, I do not believe that China will have an imminent military response or invasion against Taiwan. I think there are important elections coming up in both Taiwan and the United States.
Yes.
It's not necessary for Beijing to make a decision now. And also, we got to understand that we are now in a pretty difficult global economic situation, and China has its own domestic problems.
Right.
It is not in China's interest to do so. As I said earlier, that once you started this machine, you have to do follow-ups.
Yeah. Exactly.
If you do not have, if you are not sure you can complete the job, then just don't stop it. Don't start it, or otherwise you are in much, much deeper trouble.
But in your opinion, like you said earlier, elections are coming up, and also economically speaking, we don't think that China will be taking any measures that far. But in your perspective, to what extent, whether it's a multilateral collaboration between the U.S. and so many countries, or Taiwan's response, to what extent do you think China may really take action?
I think it depends on how they assess the overall integrated capacity and capability that we can generate. And I think at least 1/4 of the American active duty forces in the Pacific are along the first island chain already. Okay, so China should learn that. It depends on how rational and how much the domestic problems that they may encounter to tilt their decision. But a rational choice in Beijing should not go for that conclusion that China needs to act now.
So definitely, the negotiations will really have to happen between these two superpower countries. But as we're seeing right now, I think Biden also wants to have another phone call with Xi, but it seems like he's been ghosted by Xi. So what do you think of this, Tony?
this is nothing new. China plays the game. I'm mad. You need to tell me you're sorry. And my
Just like
personal
boyfriend and girlfriend. I'm sorry.
exactly. So when I was in the Pentagon, every time we announce arms sale to Taiwan, China cuts off male-to-male relationship. We have military relationship with China for confidence building, mutual trust, and but they look at it as something they can discard anytime. And United States always ends up asking, "Okay, it's time. Let's start doing this again." So just from that, it makes you think they don't value male-to-male contact. However, when we impose economic sanction that hurts them, they come, hey, let's talk about this, right? So in this case, they feel they have the upper hand because they can influence Russia, okay, the Ukraine war. So I think they feel United States need to come begging, and also in most cases when they did something wrong, such as the recent incident with the Chinese fighter approaching our RC-135, the EP3, when their ship ran in front of our ship, almost causing collision. When we get on the phone, get on the hotline, they don't answer. But when General Milley called them after, January 6th, they answered because they feel that's embarrassment on the U.S. part, and U.S. is coming to say something, right? Because Milley try to warn them, don't do anything stupid, but they answer the phone. So it's very interesting, the fact that right now they won't answer a request for Biden to talk because they feel they have the upper hand. You need to come ask for help. But I don't necessarily believe that's the case.
But do you think this phone call could be urgent as well? Do you think Biden is also desperate in trying to have a conversation with Xi? Or if Xi just keeps ghosting on him, the U.S. will have their own measures as well?
I think it is important for the world because, one, we don't want China to start providing Russia with lethal arms, which could lengthen the war.
Yes.
And also, if China has a way to bring about peace, that's in everybody's interest, including the United States. So I think that's the objective of the call. Now, China's playing hard to get, so I'm not sure what the final outcome will be. Alex might have better insight.
Yeah, because if China is not responding to President Biden's call or the senior level communication, it also hurt China itself because China, at least in the recent months, they want to be seen as a responsible player, even a mediator of conflicting parties. I think if you really want an international great power status, then you do things in a rational way and reasonable way.